Midnight, 4-5 brutal hours inside Capitol Room 2141, Jim Jordan tried everything to break Jasmine Crockett. He cut off questions, used edited footage, and made relentless claims that she was defending a DOJ corrupted by political bias. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, with one leaked document and a single sentence, she flipped the script and turned the room upside down. 0:30, this was more than a political clash. It was a battle over justice, racial bias, and the weaponization of law. So what did Jasmine reveal that silenced the attacks and exposed the game? Stay with us. This story is worth every second of your time. The summons came not with courtesy, but as a command. 054, a single line, and signed at the bottom, burned across Jasmine Crockett's inbox like a silent alarm. You are hereby required to appear before the House Judiciary Committee at 9 a.m. in room 2141, Rayburn House Office Building. No explanation was given, no briefing, no formal courtesy extended across the aisle. 116, just a name at the top of the agenda, Chairman Jim Jordan, and a title that screamed vendetta cloaked in duty, oversight hearing on the weaponization of the Department of Justice. To Jasmine, a former civil rights attorney who'd stared down racist prosecutors and walked through courtrooms thick with contempt, the signal was clear. 138, this wasn't about oversight. This was about the erasure of her party, of her president, of the very ground she stood on. By 8:15 a.m., room 2141 was already alive with murmurs, aides shuffling papers, reporters checking battery packs, lobbyists pretending not to eavesdrop. And in the center, under the seal of the U.S. House of Representatives, sat Jim Jordan, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight, eyes cold. He wasn't just hosting a hearing. He was setting a trap. 212, one by one, Republican members filed in behind him like hawks perching above a battlefield. Some smirked. One even whispered, "Let's see if she folds today." Jasmine Crockett walked in without a word, blazer sharp, braids pinned. The silence that followed her was electric. She didn't need to announce her presence. She was the threat they feared. 237, what boiled her blood beneath the calm surface was that this entire circus wasn't about justice. It was about revenge. Jordan was furious that multiple Trump allies were now under investigation. Furious that facts had outpaced party loyalty. 301, and so he twisted the gavel of his committee into a political weapon and pointed it straight at Jasmine Crockett. Why? Because she was black. Because she was loud. Because she knew the Constitution better than most of them combined. Because she was never supposed to be in that room holding power. And then, just as a heavy fog of silence had settled over room 2141, Jim Jordan made his move. He gave a small, practiced nod to his aide. 326, instantly, the lights in the room dimmed slightly, and a large screen on the back wall glowed to life, bright and ominous. The atmosphere shifted. What had started as a government hearing now felt more like a carefully staged television show. The screen flickered and a video began to play. 345, but this wasn't raw, unedited evidence. This wasn't a simple presentation of facts. It was a highly edited, one-sided narrative designed to push a single message. The video showed blurry surveillance clips of Hunter Biden walking into office buildings, sitting at conference tables, speaking with unnamed people. 410, it cut to DOJ officials speaking at press conferences, but their quotes were chopped mid-sentence, stripped of full meaning. Headlines splashed across the screen in big red letters, DOJ silent on Biden's dealings, questions mount over Hunter's legal shield. The clips came fast, each one more dramatic than the last. And over it all, a deep, intense voice spoke like a movie trailer narrator. 434, secret meetings, politically motivated immunity, selective justice. It sounded official, but it was clearly meant to create doubt, fear, and outrage. As the final clip disappeared, the screen went black, but one line remained glowing in white letters, DOJ shields president's son from consequences. Jordan didn't pause. He stood up like a man stepping onto a battlefield. 502, his tone was sharp, his voice loud and cutting, meant to grab headlines as much as attention. He stared straight at Jasmine Crockett and delivered his line with practiced precision. Miss Crockett, can you admit to this committee that your administration is using the Department of Justice to punish political enemies and protect its own? The words hit the room like a slap. It wasn't a question. 533, It was an accusation, a carefully built trap. Across the back of the room, conservative reporters and media aides leaned forward, gripping their phones, live-streaming the moment in real time. Even before Jasmine could open her mouth, social media headlines were already being drafted. Jordan corners Crockett in DOJ corruption hearing. 5:57, one journalist whispered into his mic, "She's not ready for this." A Fox News producer watching through a live feed smiled and told his assistant, "We've got the clip we need." And around Jasmine, the pressure rose, not because the evidence was real, but because the scene had been staged so perfectly. 6:20, the video, the voiceover, the lighting, the timing of the question, it wasn't oversight. It wasn't a search for truth. It was a political performance, and she was the chosen target. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Her face remained calm, unreadable. But inside, Jasmine felt it, the ground shifting, not from facts or law, but from perception, from performance, from power playing dress up as justice. 6:50, she could see what they were trying to do. They weren't just putting the DOJ on trial. They were putting her on trial, her words, her judgment, her right to be in that room, speaking truth in a system that was trying to push her out. Seated in the eye of a political storm, with every camera locked on her and every conservative waiting for her to stumble, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She didn't rush to defend the Biden administration. 7:18, she didn't take the bait. Instead, she leaned in slightly, not with fear, but with clarity, and did something no one in that room was prepared for. She changed the direction of the conversation completely. Her voice was low but sharp, each word landing like a pin drop in a room full of lit matches. 7:44, Chairman Jordan, she began, her gaze fixed on him, calm but unshakable. "Where exactly were you when the son-in-law of a sitting Supreme Court justice accepted funding from Trump-aligned PACs?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone carried the weight of something far more powerful than volume, truth backed by intent. The effect was immediate. 8:09, the room, buzzing just seconds before with smug energy and partisan confidence, went dead silent. Not the silence of boredom, but the silence of fear. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone says the thing everyone else was too afraid to say. Jasmine had just named the unnameable. She didn't deflect. She exposed, and in that single moment, she reminded the room and the country watching that corruption wasn't exclusive to one party. 8:36, Jordan didn't respond right away. He stared back at her, jaw clenched, caught off guard. He hadn't prepared for a counterattack, especially not one that hit at the heart of the very system he was pretending to protect. His papers lay still in front of him, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was calculating, and that, more than anything, told the truth. 9:01, Jasmine's question had landed. Across the aisle, a few Democratic members shifted in their seats. One gave a knowing glance, like someone watching a chess game turn in a single move. Another offered a slow, almost imperceptible nod of respect. A quiet clap echoed from the far left corner, not loud enough to get gabbled, but clear enough for the cameras to catch. 9:28, it wasn't applause for drama. It was for precision. Jasmine hadn't just responded. She had reclaimed the hearing, moment by moment, word by word. And what made it so devastating, so honest, was that Jasmine wasn't asking a trick question. She was asking a real one, the kind that demanded real answers from people who were far too comfortable asking others to explain themselves while never doing the same. Her question pulled back the curtain. 9:58, it said, "If we're going to talk about weaponized justice, then let's talk about all of it, not just the parts that make you feel powerful." She hadn't changed the subject. She had revealed the double standard buried inside the subject. And that's why the silence stayed, because in that instant, everyone knew. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending herself. 10:21, she was putting the system on trial. But the silence that followed Jasmine's question didn't just hang, it choked. It wrapped itself around the room like smoke, thick and undeniable. And for the first time in the hearing, Jim Jordan looked unsure, his brow furrowed, lips tightening as if fighting to keep his control from slipping further. 10:47, he shifted in his chair, reached for his stack of papers, and began flipping through them, too fast, too loud. It was the nervous shuffle of a man trying to reset a performance that had already gone off script. His eyes flicked briefly to the screen behind him, now blank, as if hoping the video would somehow reappear and reassert his dominance. But it wouldn't. The power had shifted. 11:12, the illusion had cracked, and Jasmine's question, so precise, so unflinching, had done what hours of partisan speeches could not. It threw him off balance. Jordan cleared his throat and forced out a new line of questioning, this time clumsier, reaching for unrelated topics, whistleblower credibility, old news clips, bureaucratic timelines. 11:41, anything to drag attention away from the Supreme Court's ethical shadow she had just illuminated. But his words stumbled. His voice, once booming and confident, now rang a little too high, a little too rushed. And Jasmine, she didn't even interrupt. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything he could say. She sat poised, her hands still, her expression calm but cutting, the embodiment of composure, because she knew what he knew and what the cameras had already caught. 12:17, he had lost the room, not because he didn't speak loudly enough, but because she had spoken with truth. But Jordan's words were already collapsing under their own weight, and Jasmine could feel it, the shift in the room, the rising discomfort behind his rehearsed tone, the restless eyes of committee members who knew when something had just gone off script. 12:40, she didn't need to shout. She didn't even need to look angry. What she needed, and what she had prepared, was the truth. Not the kind you argue about on cable news, but the kind you print on paper, underline, and enter into the record with your name on it. With calm, deliberate movement, Jasmine reached into the folder in front of her. 13:03, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady, like someone who had waited long enough for noise to finish so facts could finally speak. Her hand emerged, holding a document, a government memo, plain but official, its top edge marked with red highlights and stamped with the words, confidential, Doge internal. She didn't wave it. She didn't slam it. 13:29, she simply laid it on the desk in front of her microphone and looked toward the chairman's staff. Her voice was composed, almost quiet, but its clarity carried through the marble chamber. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "I request that this document be entered into the Congressional record under full committee review." There was a pause, brief but real. A few members leaned forward, already curious. 13:53, she continued, her voice steady, not accusatory, just painfully direct. "This memo was provided to my office by an internal DOJ contact. It outlines a series of communications between senior Justice Department officials and several members of this very Congress. 14:14, according to the memo, these communications were in reference to a specific request that a federal investigation into a private defense contractor be delayed indefinitely." The room began to shift again, not loudly, not outwardly, but the change was there, in the tapping pens that stopped tapping, in the scrolling thumbs of reporters who suddenly froze mid-post. Jasmine looked directly at Jordan now, not with fury, but with certainty. 14:42, the contractor in question, she continued, is linked through multiple financial channels to campaign efforts supporting former President Donald Trump. The DOJ was urged to reconsider the timing of the investigation due to, quote, political sensitivities during the midterm cycle. A soft gasp could be heard from the back, but Jasmine wasn't done. 15:07, she turned the page once, gently, and looked down for just a second before raising her eyes back to the committee. She delivered the final line like a surgeon making the final incision. And within the attached list of congressional contacts tied to that delay request appears the name of Congressman Jim Jordan, listed as an unofficial legal sponsor to the case's hold. The words dropped like iron. No one spoke. 15:34, no one even moved. Even the distant clack of reporters' keyboards had stopped. Jordan sat motionless, lips slightly parted, the color in his face retreating just enough to notice. He looked down, not at her, but at the memo now being passed from one staffer to the next. 15:54, his own name printed in black ink on a page he had not prepared for. No lights, no video clips, no out-of-context headlines could rescue him from this. Because this wasn't an opinion, it wasn't performance. It was a receipt, a government memo, leaked or not, that tied him not to oversight, but to obstruction. And Jasmine hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't insulted anyone. 16:21, all she had done was let the truth take the microphone. And now the entire room, the committee, the press, the public, was staring not at her, but at him. But truth, when it arrives without warning and without permission, doesn't land gently. It hits like an earthquake. And in room 2141, the walls were already shaking. The second Jasmine finished reading, the room burst into motion. 1648, staffers leaned over one another, eyes scanning the pages like they couldn't believe what they were holding. Reporters rose halfway out of their chairs, whispering into phones, fingers flying across screens, sending texts that would become headlines within minutes. Even members of Congress who had spent the last hour looking bored or smug were suddenly wide-eyed, flipping through the memo, rereading the name Jim Jordan printed on government stationery, tied not to oversight, but to a request to delay justice. And then came the sound no one was expecting, Jordan's. 1724, voice cracking under the weight of panic. He shot forward in his chair, face turning red, hands gripping the edges of the desk like it was the only thing holding him up. "Mr. Chairman," he snapped, voice louder than necessary, trembling just beneath the surface. This document is unverified. It's unconfirmed. You can't enter that into the record. It's hearsay. It's political slander." 1750, his words tumbled out too quickly, one over the next, like someone trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. He looked not at Jasmine, but at the chairman, at the staffers, at anyone who might give him back the power he just lost, but no one moved. No one reached out to save him. His hand slammed against the desk, not with strength, but frustration. 1817, the sound echoed anyway, awkward and thin, like a gavel dropped by a man who no longer had the authority to use it. "Strike it. Strike it from the record," he demanded again, but the words didn't stick. The memo had already been entered. The cameras had already caught it. The press had already published it. 1836, and Jasmine, she still hadn't said another word. She didn't need to. Jordan stood now, shoulders tense, pacing a half-step behind his chair, and then came the outburst, the moment where pressure gave way to raw emotion. "You sit there acting like some truth-teller," he shouted across the chamber, his voice pushing the edge of fury. 1856, "But you're a fraud. You're not here for justice. You're part of the machine that covers everything up. You're what's wrong with this system." He pointed a trembling finger toward Jasmine's desk like an accusation could replace actual evidence. 1916, "You come in here waving some fake memo and think you can put my name in it and call that justice." His voice cracked again. And this time the whole room heard it. But Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't defend. She didn't even flinch. She just sat, hands folded, gaze steady, letting the silence do what his shouting couldn't, command respect. 1936, because everyone watching understood what was happening. This wasn't the sound of a man defending the truth. This was the sound of a man realizing that he no longer controlled the story, and the injustice wasn't just in how he shouted. It was in what he assumed, that she didn't belong here, that the only way she could win was by cheating. 1957, that the only version of truth that mattered was his. But Jasmine had done the one thing men like him fear most. She came prepared. She stayed calm. And she exposed the system using its own rules. And now Jordan's voice, the one that had once filled the room with confidence, was just noise. But as Jim Jordan's voice echoed off the chamber walls, louder, angrier, more desperate with every word, Jasmine Crockett did something that turned the entire dynamic upside down. She didn't rise. 2028, she didn't shout. She just looked at him. And somehow that stillness said more than any of his fury ever could. She had seen this before. Men like Jordan, puffed up by microphones and comfortable power, thought control meant volume. They thought rage was strength. But Jasmine knew better. 2048, she had lived through rooms colder than this, where no one listened until she forced them to. And this time she didn't need to force anything. The truth was already in the room. So when she finally spoke, her voice didn't shake. It didn't waver. It didn't rush. It was the kind of voice you hear once and remember for the rest of your life. Not because it was loud, but because it was undeniably true. 2113, she didn't raise her hand. She didn't even glance at the chairman. She just looked directly at Jordan, not with anger, but with the weight of everything he refused to see. "I didn't create this system," she said slowly, the words landing with the clarity of a hammer striking stone. "I am the result of it. 2135, the product of what happens when a system keeps betraying people like me. Not once, not twice, but over and over again." The room didn't move for a moment. No one even breathed. There was no shouting, no gavel, no objections. Just that sentence suspended in the air like smoke after an explosion. It was the kind of moment that didn't need commentary. 21:58, it just needed silence to let it sink in. Because Jasmine wasn't just responding to Jordan. She was responding to history. To every moment someone like her had been told to wait, to sit down, to lower her voice, to not take up space. And in that one line, she shattered all of it. 20 minutes later, the moment had left the room and taken over the world. On X. 22:26, the quote was already trending. Some had clipped the video and slowed it down, overlaying piano chords beneath her voice. Others posted it without sound, just the look in her eyes, that calm, razor-sharp stare, staring into a system that had tried to swallow her whole. It wasn't just a line. 22:50, it was a revelation, a reckoning, a reminder that she wasn't asking for justice. She was justice, sitting in a chair they never built for her, speaking with a voice they never wanted to hear, and saying what needed to be said when it mattered most. And yet, even after Jasmine's quiet takedown, even after the air had changed and the momentum shifted, Jim Jordan wasn't done. 23:15, he adjusted his microphone, squared his shoulders, and returned to what he thought was solid ground: procedure, structure, authority. If he couldn't win the fight through volume or narrative, he'd do it through the very Constitution itself. He began like a professor trying to take back control of a classroom, though his voice carried more frustration than clarity. 23:37, let me be absolutely clear, he said, holding up a printed copy of Article 1 as if it were a shield. Congress has the oversight responsibility to investigate the executive branch. We are not observers. We are a co-equal branch of government. 2400 hours, when the Department of Justice shows signs of partisanship, of selective prosecution, we are not just allowed, we are obligated to step in. He paused, hoping for agreement. None came. He pressed on. This is not interference. This is not obstruction. This is our constitutional duty. That's what our founders intended. And we'd be betraying their design if we turned a blind eye. 2400 hours 23, to someone unfamiliar with the law, it might have sounded convincing, strong, even righteous. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't unfamiliar. She had lived inside the law, argued it, defended it, been failed by it, and still mastered it. And when she leaned forward to respond, her tone wasn't combative. It was measured. It was exact. It was devastating. 2400 hours 47, Chairman Jordan, she began, her voice soft but sure, you are absolutely right that Congress has oversight powers. But those powers are not limitless. They are not meant to be used as tools of pressure, especially when an active criminal investigation is underway. 25:09, she lifted a legal binder from her desk and opened it slowly, carefully flipping to a tab marked in red. The U.S. Constitution does not give Congress the authority to interfere with individual cases being handled by the Department of Justice. In fact, multiple Supreme Court decisions, *McGrain v. Daugherty *, Watkins v. United States, and more recently Trump v. Mazars, all affirm that congressional oversight must serve a legitimate legislative purpose. 25:45, it cannot be used as a weapon to delay, disrupt, or discredit an active prosecution. She paused just long enough to let the weight of those words settle in the air. Her voice didn't need to rise. It was the kind of voice people lean in to hear, not because it shouts, but because it speaks the truth without blinking. Oversight, she continued, does not mean you get to reach across the aisle and tell federal prosecutors when they can or cannot do their jobs. 26:12, that's not democracy. That's interference. That's overreach. Suddenly, the room felt different. Members who had walked in expecting political theater now sat frozen, like students caught in a lecture far beyond their notes. Staffers stopped whispering. Reporters lowered their phones. 26:34, no one wanted to interrupt what had become, almost impossibly, a live constitutional seminar delivered by a woman who had been invited just to be humiliated. And here was the irony, the person they tried to frame as unqualified was now walking them through the very laws they claimed to uphold, calmly, surgically, and without missing a step. This wasn't defense. 26:57, it was a reversal of power. She wasn't on trial anymore. The system was, and the quiet that followed wasn't just silence. It was respect. The kind you can't demand, the kind you only earn. And just when it seemed like the room had already reached its boiling point, when every eye was fixed on Jasmine Crockett and every breath held in anticipation of what might come next, she leaned gently toward the mic and dropped a quiet bombshell. Mr. 27:27, Chairman, I'd like to call one additional witness. The sentence was so calm, so restrained, that for a moment no one reacted. Then a murmur spread across the chamber like ripples in water. A surprise witness. At this stage, even the press, seasoned, skeptical, and half expecting a stunt, suddenly perked up. 27:50, the door at the side of the hearing room opened slowly, and through it stepped a man in his late 40s, dressed plainly in a gray two-button suit, face pale, eyes focused. A former Department of Justice ethics officer, recently retired, called in just hours earlier by Jasmine's legal team under emergency rules. 28:10, he took the oath with a calm hand, sat down behind the microphone, and opened a thin leather folder. What came next wasn't a speech. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was clinical, deliberate, and devastating. In clear, even tones, the man testified that during his final year at DOJ, he personally witnessed internal communications and pressure from at least 3 sitting members of Congress, all requesting that the department delay or quietly drop a federal investigation into a weapons manufacturer. 28:44, the reason. The company was a major political donor to multiple Republican super PACs with ties traced directly to the Trump campaign and members of the House Judiciary Committee itself. The language used in the communications, he said, was veiled but unmistakable, urging caution for the sake of political optics and avoiding electoral turbulence. Then came the name. 29:12, he didn't pause. He didn't stutter. He just said it clearly and without ceremony. One of the members listed in those communications, marked as having made contact through back-channel intermediaries, was Congressman Jim Jordan. The room exploded. Reporters leapt from their seats. Phones shot into the air. 29:36, staffers looked at each other, wide-eyed. Mouths parted in disbelief. Some gasped, some swore under their breath. The murmur became a roar as the words Jordan and DOJ pressure surged through social media in real time. The hearing, already high stakes, had just crossed a threshold no one could walk back from. 29:58, Jordan sprang to his feet so violently that his chair nearly toppled over behind him. His voice burst out louder than at any other point during the hearing. This is outrageous. This witness is illegitimate. He wasn't disclosed. This is a political ambush. His face was flushed, his hands shaking slightly as he pounded the table. I move to immediately suspend these proceedings. 30:28, this entire hearing is a disgrace. But the moment was no longer his to control. He wasn't steering anything now, he was reacting, and the more he raised his voice, the more obvious it became that he was no longer in command of the narrative. He turned to the chairman, seeking intervention, authority, a lifeline. 30:51, but the chairman, now pale and visibly shaken himself, simply looked at him and said, "Motion denied. The witness will continue." And with that one ruling, everything changed. This was no longer just a partisan hearing, no longer a symbolic fight, no longer a performance. This was testimony on the record, under oath. 31:11, and for the first time, it wasn't Jasmine Crockett under scrutiny. It was the very man who had tried to break her, now staring down the barrel of a sworn allegation with his own name printed in the center. Outside the chamber, the story spread like fire. News banners lit up. 31:32, breaking, witness ties Jim Jordan to DOJ interference. Jasmine Crockett calls surprise whistleblower. Within minutes, the hashtag hearing of the century began trending worldwide. Clips of the moment, the calm voice naming names, the eruption, Jordan's panic protest, flooded every feed. Commentators whispered that this would become a landmark moment in congressional history. 31:58, late-night anchors were already rewriting their monologues. For the first time in years, a hearing had stopped being theater and started being something else, accountability. And in the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett, calm, composed, still seated, her expression unreadable but her presence undeniable. She didn't look like someone who had won a battle. 32:26, she looked like someone who had finally, quietly, opened a door that was never supposed to exist. But as the hearing spiraled toward something far more serious than anyone had expected, as evidence mounted and cameras rolled and reputations began to teeter, Jim Jordan reached for the one card he had left. It wasn't a document. It wasn't a ruling. It wasn't a fact. 32:49, it was resentment. And it came sharpened. He leaned forward again, but this time there was no legal ease, no pretense of oversight or constitutional authority. His voice, once projected with performative outrage, now turned cold, personal. "You know what this really is, Miss Crockett?" he asked, pausing just long enough for the cameras to lean in. 33:14, it's not about justice. It's about race. Every time someone challenges your position, you drag the conversation into identity, into history, into pain. You weaponize it. You turn every disagreement into discrimination. He shook his head, tone bitter now, eyes narrowed. You always make it about race, and I'm asking you, where is the law in that? Where is the Constitution in that? Where is justice when everything becomes about skin color? The words felt like steel in the room. And that was the point. He wasn't just challenging her. 33:51, he was trying to silence her. He was betting that if he could paint her as reactionary, emotional, and racially obsessed, everything she'd said, the documents, the witness, the questions, would fade under the weight of stereotype. He wanted the room to see her not as a truth-teller, but as a divider. And the worst part was, it had worked before. But not today. 34:17, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean in. She simply straightened her posture and turned toward Jordan, meeting his eyes with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing the cost of telling the truth and doing it anyway. Her hands rested still. 34:37, her voice was soft, almost too soft at first, but there wasn't a soul in the room who didn't hear every single word. "Congressman Jordan," she said slowly, "when a legal system consistently punishes people who look like me, when it incarcerates us more, charges us harsher, sentences us longer, when it polices our neighborhoods but never our boardrooms, I don't have the luxury of pretending that race isn't part of the law." 35:06, the room had gone silent. Even the restless shuffling of aides and the tapping of journalists' keyboards had stopped. "So no," she continued, "I don't make everything about race. But when a black man can be shot 7 times in the back for reaching into his car, and a white man can storm a Capitol building and walk out in costume, I will call that what it is." She paused just long enough to let the silence breathe. 35:33, and when justice is blind only when it's convenient, when it sees through me, but never sees for me, then I don't just have the right to speak about it. I have the duty. Every syllable was sharp. Every line unshaken. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even emotional. She was undeniably clear, the clarity of someone who had learned long ago that pain is not the opposite of reason, but sometimes the fuel for it. 36:00, and then she delivered the line that no one would forget. Not that day, not for years to come. I didn't bring race into this chamber, Congressman. It was built into the walls long before I ever walked through. Then there was a sound, a soft hum from the gallery above. A woman, maybe in her mid-50s, maybe older, wiped her face and lowered her head. 36:24, she wasn't the only one. A low sniffle was heard from across the press bench. Even a few lawmakers, seasoned and cynical, kept their eyes fixed forward, lips pressed shut, hands folded. The hearing had stopped being performance. It had become something else, something harder, something real. Jordan, for once, didn't respond. 36:49, he couldn't, not without making it worse, not without confirming what the entire room now understood. He had tried to accuse her of using identity as a shield, and she had turned it into a mirror, not just for him, but for the entire system. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. The audience, both in the room and across the country, wasn't listening to him anymore. They were watching her. 37:10, a woman who had walked into a hearing clearly meant to discredit her and instead put the entire institution on trial with a sentence that cut through 240 years of polite hypocrisy. Outside the chamber, the line exploded in real time. Asterisk, it was built into the walls before I walked through, asterisk. 37:29, it was quoted, shared, stitched into reels and montages. Civil rights attorneys reposted it. Law students printed it. One reporter tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just taught a class this Congress was never prepared to take." And back inside, Jasmine didn't bask in the moment. She didn't smile. She didn't look smug or vindicated. She simply exhaled deeply, quietly, and returned her hands to the table. Because for her, this wasn't a performance. 38:00, it was her life, and every word she had just spoken was a history lesson written in blood and paperwork. This wasn't the line that ended the hearing. It was the line that ensured the hearing would never be seen the same way again. And as the echo of her final sentence still lingered in the heavy air, it was built into the walls before I walked through no one dared to speak. 38:26, not the chairman, not the staff, not even Jim Jordan. It was the silence that comes when everyone knows a line has been crossed that cannot be walked back. And yet the one who crossed it didn't flinch. She held the room not by force but by truth. And somehow, she wasn't done. Jasmine sat still for a long moment, as if deciding whether the room deserved one more truth. 38:55, and then, slowly, she leaned forward again, not for herself, but for everyone watching who had ever been shut out of rooms like this. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't crack. It was firm, controlled. But beneath the calm was something unshakable, conviction forged in injustice. "Let me leave you with this," she said, her tone crystal clear. "America doesn't need more politicians. 39:23, it doesn't need more podium pounders, more headline hunters, or more people chasing sound bites." She glanced once toward Jordan, who now stared blankly at the table in front of him, lips pressed tight. "What we need, what the law needs, is people who understand it. 39:46, people who have lived under it, not just preached it. People who know what it's like to be punished by it unfairly, and still choose to respect it." There was no pretense in her voice, no performance, just a woman telling the truth in the one place that never wanted to hear it. "We don't need more lawmakers. We need people who live the law." The sentence landed like a verdict. 40:09, no one responded, not even Jordan, because in that moment there was nothing left to say. He had come in with a strategy, a narrative, a stage, and Jasmine had torn it apart without ever raising her voice. She had outlasted him, out-argued him, out-prepared him. And most devastating of all, she had outgrounded him. 40:31, for 5 hours she never lost her thread, not once. And now she was closing like a surgeon, stitching the last wound she didn't cause. The chairman cleared his throat quietly, almost reverently, and looked across the bench. He didn't bang the gavel. He didn't issue a